I guess I am most struck by the resonance with what Jackie's spoken about, because about the just post delivery and labor experience needing solitude, stillness, a recognition of the sacredness of that time, of a mother's deep desire to have the space to take cognizance of how much has shifted when that baby finally leaves your body, that you've known and connected with in other ways, but that is now physically here before your eyes. And also that the reality that you've come through this incredible arc of labor, which is absolutely unique to everybody's body, which is a constant collision with what you thought it would be and how you orchestrated it would be. And the reality of what you experience is in that moment. There's so much in terms of just time and perception and body and hormones and exhaustion and characters in the story all around and the environment, and let alone, I want to say strobe lights because that's what it feels like instead of fluorescent, and what I'm struck about is that the reality is that the story I'm here to share is literally a polar opposite story. I am the mother of 4 children. My first was a teen pregnancy that ended up happening at Joburg General. I was 19 years old. The father was there, but he was not my life partner for sure. This I already knew. And I felt very alone, and I had my pethidine shots, and I delivered fearfully in Joburg General Hospital. My next pregnancy was 10 years later. I was 29, and I had this blissful home birth experience thanks to Joy McPherson, and an incredible partnership with a life partner who was there, and everything was down to the numerology. Was all in sync, 19 Eden Road on the 19th of January, and my waters broke at 1900 hours. Okay, so it was a cosmic, completely different experience, which I think is a useful thing to think about, because I made a lot of assumptions about, that I would have a daughter. I'm an only daughter. I have a good, not perfect relationship with my mother, but I just assumed I'd have this mother-daughter-sister thing going on. I do a lot of feminism work in the world, and that's not about that word, because I never studied that. I have not been an activist in any movement, but my life learning has been very much from a feminine perspective, obviously being in this body, but also being on a planet that has structured our ways of being that is literally driven by the masculine. In most contexts. And so my third pregnancy was a shock in every possible way. Firstly, it was so soon. I felt suddenly pregnant, as if after the third time I wouldn't know about the birds and the bees. I intuitively felt that it was too soon. My son Kamal, who was the wholeness completion, is what his name means, and he was the synergist number 19 one. It was about 2 years later that I was pregnant, and I still felt like I wanted more time with him. I wanted to give him more of my attention, and I had a 10-year-old son who I felt was heading towards a pre-adolescent cusp, and I felt this was already a lot. The idea of being pregnant so soon was, And I felt guilty about being ambivalent, because some part of me has always thought this is the most incredible, divine, phenomenal human capacity to be pregnant, to give birth, to do it more than once. And that to be a woman is profoundly connected to this reverence that I have for it, and a certainty that I could never survive giving a child up for adoption, having an abortion, with no judgment about women who have to make those traumatic choices. But I'm saying I think I'd be in a mental asylum if I had to have made those choices. I just felt like even though it would seem the inappropriate time, I would choose this life. I would choose to adapt whatever my plans were to welcome this child in. And so I did go through a very short period of ambivalence and then welcome this presence of another baby. So today I'm sitting here 11 years, 4 months, and 22 days after the stillbirth of my daughter. So I have 3 sons, one who was, again, seemingly too soon after, conceived 4 months after my daughter was stillborn, and his name's Kwezi, and he's very much alive. He's 10 years old, and his name means morning star. So the context is that I'd already had 2 successful deliveries. I made assumptions that I'm young. No one around me had ever really shared the fact that you could have a stillborn baby. I knew this was possible, but nobody spoke about this around me, no one in my immediate family. I also hadn't lost any members of my family really close, so this couldn't be closer. Inside my womb, inside my body, inside the seemingly cocooned, idyllic family unit was extremely traumatic. I felt like the difference between, as an artist, as a human being, as a very compassionate person by nature, empathizing with people who've experienced death and loss was another dimension to being initiated. And I still feel that anyone who's bereaved, whether it's a womb loss or grief in general, death is a profound teacher. It's an initiation. If you have not experienced the loss of someone close, it's something else to that empathy. That's the transition I felt I went through. And also that this grief was a spiral, that it isn't a train track to recovery, but more a way to integrate your brokenness. I don't know who you were post, because there's life before and life after, and that's why the book I wrote as a journal, really, that became a book I wanted to give to the world, into this mammoth silence around an experience that is so prolific around the world, but also particularly in Southern Africa and South Asia. Unbelievable blanket of silence. Of silencing, of self-censorship, of silence within families, of silenced grief that has long repercussions for marriages, for families, for communities, for siblings who will become parents and will also feel inept to deal with and language this grief because of the silence we have permitted consciously or unconsciously. And the silence also around what goes horribly wrong in hospital contexts, in relation to what to do, because people are so groomed to prepare for what to do when the baby's alive. And I'm not only talking about medical processes of what to do when the baby's not alive, but the traffic that she spoke about. Just like you'd be going, wonderful, new baby, let's check her blood, let's do this and that. That same traumatic buzz of noise is what assaults a woman as a secondary trauma when the recognition is that this child is not alive. Nurses, doctors talking over her like she's a piece of meat, or addressing the issue, which is a crisis, with a pace that is absolute. It's like being on that snake ride at Rotanga Junction in relation to this profound underwater feeling that everything has slowed down. Every sound is like nothing makes sense. What you touch, what you see, what you smell is not translating in the way that they are discussing your blood pressure and whether to remove the child and asking the mother what does she want to do and or do you practice any religion, would you like to bury? Or discussing you in terms of medical terminology like GPH and IUD and alien language. And I think there are very simple ways in which a schooling for families and for medical staff who want to do the right thing, who have a humanity and an intuition that can respond differently. If we're not silent about it, if we say this is what we need as a mother from the inside speaking out, but also if we say, how could we do this differently? Because if we're truly listening, mothers are not coming back for counseling support because they have had secondary trauma. They have already been silenced in other ways and find it very difficult to find words and language, as I have in many ways, and still can sit here with a space in me that can be filled by no one and nothing else. I often say that my daughter is the one who does the work. I prepare to some degree what it is I want to say, but I leave a lot of space for what I think she wants to say through me in this process. And that is also coming from a belief system or a frame of thinking in my life that says nothing happens by accident. And like the immune system, everything is connected. Every single birth story that I've heard today has given me something, and I hope something of what I'm sharing gives you something back. That they are just as unique as our fingerprints. There will be no other child like the daughter Iman Bongiwe that I gave birth to on the 3rd of January 2003. She is not replaceable. I don't want to get over her. I don't want to get past this. I don't want to be told, focus on the 3 sons you have, or it's God's will. Or if your soul of your child leaves before you, they're standing at the gates of Jannah, interceding for you. This is very well-intentioned offerings of, like they say, telling pregnant mothers, this urge to give advice. We have an urge to console and to comfort, but we are really inarticulate around grief. We are at the kindergarten level of what to say when somebody dies in general. But a stillborn, a birth loss, a child that you so profoundly knew and will never forget existed, but is invisible to the world, is inaudible to them, and very quickly forgettable. So this needs a language. So the diagnosis that I had, gestational prouric hypertension, was the least relevant thing for me in terms of my understanding of what this experience was about. For some mothers, they want to know. They want to know exactly what happened, and they want someone to blame, and sometimes there is a legal case. Please look up the Libby Gonan story. My story has been published in various places, and I speak in different spaces to medical students, support to moms, and have had the incredibly humbling experience to be asked to come into a room where a mother I've never met has just given birth somewhere in gardens to a stillborn baby, and someone had told her about my book, and she felt ready to speak. So I sit in this incredibly unimaginable place with a husband and a wife who are willing to take a total stranger into their sacred space, because this language of I've been there is something that is more powerful than any book or study or statistic could ever give you in terms of coming up with the formula of what families and mothers need. Is this mother-to-mother dialogue? Is this breaking of the silence? Is this voicing and giving space, as this conference has done, to mothers' voices? They have a profound wisdom to offer in terms of how we can do something about this. So, I'm a writer and a poet, I perform, and whatever previous capacity to deal with loss and grief I had before, well, death reminds you of how much you don't know, and nothing that I had used as a coping mechanism before really worked, other than this fundamental urge to write. And I was writing, to console, to have a private space in which I could share some of the deepest, darkest feelings that I felt would worry my family, Just like some of them would have been offended if you had this bubbling newborn and you said, "Shh, I want to be alone." They might take offense. Similarly, when I was thinking about, I just want to die, I just want to go where she is, I don't care that I have a loving husband and 2 sons and a great, support network. It's not relevant. She's not here, and I don't want to get over this. Those feelings and thoughts needed a space. They should have permission. Otherwise, they stay in the body. So instead of, it's ridiculous to try to tell this story. So I'm going to just read an extract from the beginning and the end of a 3-year arc from 2003. New Year's Day was when I knew for sure there was no movement, and it took 3 days of various induction processes to get my daughter delivered. 1st of January 2003. I've just taken the tablet to catalyze the contractions that will deliver you out of my nest, out of your nest, my womb. I sit with a lit candle in the garden, listening to a baby crying next door, wind blowing through the trees, a plane flying over above. How do I leave home full of you and come home tomorrow empty? My mind swings between dead, calm practicalities of to-do lists and necessary arrangements to tears cutting me down to a deep, quiet grief I cannot fully even know, even though I know it is there. How could I imagine that your last fevered fluttering was goodbye? How could I hold on to the thought that you've been sleeping lifeless inside of me since then, already gone? It's been almost 4 days. I race from recollecting all the signs that came before to tell us that this was where your path would lead. Signs that I shut out so many times, dreams, clear calls for me to face the silence of you no longer kicking inside me. This morning in the shower, a clear image of these 4 words on a blank page, few words, came to me. Your death has changed my life. 9th of December 2005. When you finally and suddenly left my womb, my trembling gaze, my trembling arms, my yearning gaze, I began wrapping myself unconsciously in a second skin, spinning an invisible crystal thread around myself. I began to adapt to a new living, slowing down my movement, my breathing, wanting some days to die. Some nights suspended in a pool of my own tears, affirming that I was still alive. Your dying changed every detail of my living. I could not recognize the eyes in my mirror, feel the familiarity of my body as it once was, only an aching awkwardness, an amputation that still had to register. Even my skin felt too thin, so I began spinning day after day, night into day, day into night, circling myself in a ritual of sorrow, a concentrated circling of the wound, the deep tunnel it seemed you had slipped into, and I was determined to follow and find you. Sometimes my chest grew too heavy, I inhaled smoke instead of air, a secret torture, a silent ritual of remembrance, expressing my burning, holding myself in the moment, not wanting me to move forward or memory to take me back. Only the manageable size of each moment, each breath was as far as I wanted to step. Soon, almost 1,000 days would have passed, my spinning long since come to an end. I have been in a cocoon of my own making, playing alive, playing dead, even playing. Somewhere in this shadow pocket, I have reawakened to my stillness, my aloneness, a gentle recognition of my separateness from all this weeping. I have found ways to allow and suppress my tears, words to explain why I do, perhaps only discovering parts of myself I never knew before you. As this third year closes, I feel a fundamental shift, a crack in my shell, where the light has begun streaming in, warming my new skin. In my heart, I am standing on a cliff, waiting for the wind to carry me. I will not leap or dive. I won't resist when the moment of flight arrives. In all this waiting and wishing, raging and aching, accepting and denying, I have developed a comfort in the dark, a dawn, a hunger for the dawn. In my bones, I know I have grown wings. Grief knows the way. In its dark cave, here the real healing work begins. Here I begin. Here I begin. You must begin. Will you begin? We must begin.